Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks, Christina. Today, I'm going to be talking about optimizing Dockless Bikeshare for cities. And this is largely coming from a forthcoming policy brief that provides guidance around Dockless Bikeshare regulation. Over the past couple of months, we've been hearing from our field office staff who have been meeting with cities and finding that there's really a lot more questions than answers when it comes to Dockless Bikeshare regulation. And so we put together this framework to really encourage cities to think more holistically about using Dockless Bikeshare to help achieve broader goals. And this policy framework and guidance will also be included in the update to our Bikeshare planning guide, which will be released this June. As far as the agenda for my presentation, I'm just going to quickly go through some background on how cities have approached Dockless Bikeshare regulation to date, then move into some risks and opportunities that Dockless Bikeshare presents, and then the majority of the presentation will focus on the policy framework, and I'll just close with some forward-looking thoughts. So as most of you probably know, the idea of stationless bike share isn't really new. We've seen this utilized in Europe for a number of years by Nextbike, by the transit-oriented OV Fiat system in the Netherlands. But this sort of new wave of Dockless bike share that relies really heavily on users accessing GPS-enabled bikes with their smartphones emerged in 2014 on a few university campuses in China. These were relatively small, contained systems that were, for the most part, unregulated. And then over the next couple of years, Dockless Bikeshare grew extremely popular in China as companies started receiving significant investment funding, which allowed them to expand. They were able to start dropping these huge fleets of bikes onto city streets in an attempt to compete for market share. And this really led to an oversupply of bikes in many cities, and that sort of resulted in a whole host of other challenges. So by April of 2017, several major Chinese cities like Beijing and Shenzhen and Guangzhou and others released draft regulations to better manage Dockless Bikeshare operations. And then a few months later, in July of 2017, we saw Seattle release the first proactive permit requirements, which demanded that operators meet certain standards before they were allowed to launch bikes in the city. So since then, other cities have started emulating this preemptive regulation strategy that was pioneered by Seattle. And it became clear that a delicate balance is really required between, on the one hand, allowing operators the flexibility to innovate, to compete, and to improve their service delivery. And then on the other, wanting to limit this huge oversupply of bikes and also ensure safety and protect users. So now in April of 2018, more than 30 cities around the world have either proposed or adopted regulations to better manage Dockless Bikeshare, and more cities are added to that list every day. But despite seeing firsthand the challenges that an unregulated environment can generate, many cities have taken sort of a wait and see or a free market approach to Dockless Bikeshare management. And both of these approaches are extremely risky, given that poorly delivered service could really degrade the image and the potential that Dockless Bikeshare has. And a lack of regulatory oversight may also jeopardize future investments in cycling and degrade the reputation of bikeshare as a viable piece of a city's transportation network. But on the other hand, well-regulated Dockless Bikeshare establishes a real expectation that operators need to collaborate with the city and also provide a high-quality service for users. Outcome-oriented regulation also creates a fair and predictable operating environment for businesses, which tends to result in reliable and safe bike share that contributes to citywide benefits like greenhouse gas and other emissions reductions, improved physical health, and more space for walking and cycling. And Dockless Bikeshare has significantly impacted travel behavior in some cities. A report from Shenzhen's Transport Commission showed that trips made by Dockless bikes replaced close to 10% of trips made by private cars, and also reduced petroleum consumption by 13%. So in terms of opportunity, that's pretty huge. The Dockless Bikeshare operating model, while it has yet to prove itself as financially sustainable in the long term, it has been able to achieve scale in a way that station-based systems haven't. And this ability to quickly expand access to biking could significantly shift travelers away from private cars. So before we jump into the policy framework itself, I just wanted to take a slide to quickly review sort of the purpose of regulation and why it's even necessary in this context. So in general, regulation helps to promote a fair and transparent environment for operators, while also making sure that consumers or the users of whatever's being regulated are being provided a high quality product that won't ultimately harm them. But what's also important about regulation is that it establishes a common baseline from which success, as far as performance goes, can really be defined, and also progress can be measured. So in the case of Dockless Bikeshare, without regulation, we tend to see what's in these photos. So vandalized, haphazardly parked, kind of discarded bikes, and no real recourse for the city to minimize these outcomes or to cultivate more optimal behavioral norms. So this policy framework is essentially a way for cities to think more holistically about what they ultimately want from a bike share system and how regulatory policies can help achieve those goals in the long term. And this approach isn't necessarily specific to Dockless Bikeshare. It could really be applied to station-based bike share. It could be applied to other privately operated shared mobility systems like TNCs. So the first step, before we really dive into addressing the more concrete challenges like public space issues and data concerns, it's really important to kind of take a step back and consider how bike share can act as a tool to achieve broader goals. So identifying citywide goals such as greenhouse gas emissions reductions or mode shift away from private cars, and then factoring a bike share system into achieving those goals can help cities decide which policies to prioritize and how best to track progress and measure success. And I think a good example of this is in the Greater Manchester region of the UK, which currently has an MOU with Mobike and is using Dockless Bikeshare to help meet existing climate-related goals, including increasing bike mode share and reducing BKT and single occupancy vehicle trips. But bike share could also contribute to economic development goals, attracting tourists and businesses by offering an affordable, sustainable transportation mode for visitors and for prospective employees. In addition to contributing to citywide goals, policies obviously need to address the specific operations challenges related to Dockless Bikeshare, including oversupply of bikes, a lack of coordination between governments and operators, and any uncertainty around service delivery. And I'll be talking about these in more detail in the next couple of slides. Cities also need to hire staff to verify and monitor real-time operator data in order for these policies to really have any weight. And staff should also enforce policies in the event of non-compliance. And I'll also talk about this a little bit more later on. And then periodically, cities should analyze operator data and also collect feedback from users in order to evaluate overall system performance. And that evaluation can help to identify how emerging technologies or changing business models might impact system performance. And then city staff can make more informed decisions about potentially updating or amending existing policies if that's deemed to be necessary. So diving into this first step, positioning bike share within city goals, we can see in this chart how an individual policy can actually meet what we refer to as these operations level objectives, but also contribute to these broader city goals. So I'm not going to go through all of this, and of course there's many more policies that can be considered, but just sort of as a demonstration, if we look at the first policy here, which is establishing standards for operators to share data with the city, this policy meets all 4 operations level objectives. It helps the city understand where bikes may be blocking public spaces, in what neighborhoods bikes are typically found and where they're not, on what routes users may be riding bike-share bikes and maybe areas that they typically avoid, and also what safety risks users might be facing. And then more broadly though, establishing data standards will help to improve cycling and other transportation infrastructure planning, as well as network connectivity at the city level. And that benefits all cyclists and even drivers and public transit riders to some extent, not just bike share users. So verified data that's reported in a common format can also allow the city to track progress over time towards other goals like mode shift, emissions reductions, or air quality improvements. So the second step in the policy framework establishes these operations level objectives that Dockless operators are going to need to meet in order to facilitate a successful bike share system for users and for the city. And we've grouped these objectives into the 4 buckets you see here. So effectively managing public space, fostering equity and accessibility, improving planning and enforcement, and protecting users. We encourage cities to have at least one policy requirement in place under each of these objectives. But of course, a more robust set of policies for each objective will likely yield more successful operations overall. So now I'm going to go through a few policy options for each of the operations level objectives. And again, these are just options. So some might make more or less sense depending on the context of the city, and of course the capacity of city staff to manage bike share. The first operations objective is to effectively manage public space. And probably the most vocal complaints about Dockless bike share are bikes blocking pedestrian rights of way on sidewalks, bikes tipped over or looking cluttered, vandalized bikes. So, we know that in some city areas, public space might be less contested because of wider sidewalks or maybe lower pedestrian flows. But in other areas where there might be more narrow sidewalks or higher pedestrian traffic, or if the number of Dockless bike share bikes available has far exceeded demand, parked bike share bikes are going to be competing for public space. So in order to better encourage parking habits and more orderly public space, cities could require operators to perhaps respond to reports of broken or misparked bikes within a certain amount of time, with non-compliance resulting in a fine or the removal of the bike by the city at the operator's expense. Or the city could consider adopting a lock to requirement, which would mean that all Dockless bikes would have to lock to an object like a bike rack or a signpost, as opposed to having a self-locking wheel lock. And this could help to reduce instances of tipped over bikes and bikes left and rights of way. But it's also really important to identify additional implications of some of these policies. So in the case of a lock to requirement, while parking might become more orderly, the city will need to sort of devise a strategy to expand bike parking, since the use of racks by all Dockless bikes will significantly increase demand for that. Dockless bike share regulations should foster equity and accessibility throughout the system. If Dockless bikes are consistently available, then access to transit and job centers could drastically improve, especially in historically disconnected communities. And this is sort of unlikely to happen organically because, of course, private companies are profit maximizing, and they just may not prioritize equity and accessibility at the level that a public transportation system does. So it's really up to the city to demand that Dockless bike share operators meet certain standards that ensure that bikes are available and affordable to all people. And this could be done through requirements that operators provide reduced fare structures or alternate options to credit card payments, maybe allowing users to add debit cards or prepaid cards to their accounts, or even facilitating a cash payment option. This is something that San Francisco includes in their permits, so operators there are required to offer a year-long plan for low-income customers that waives any deposits and also offers a cash payment option. Transit integration requirements are another approach to fostering accessibility. many of us are aware that citywide accessibility rests heavily on the reach of the transit network, and Bikeshare has the opportunity to extend that reach if it's well integrated and affordable for users. So reduced fare Bikeshare trips that connect to transit and the ability to access Bikeshare and transit using the same RFID card could really significantly reduce first last mile gaps. And to encourage transit integration, cities could require dockless bikes be unlockable using their transit system's RFID card, or the city could work with operators to develop a payment platform that facilitates reduced fare transfers. Dockless bikes with onboard GPS can provide robust trip data that's particularly valuable to cities because it can inform a variety of planning decisions, as well as shed light on how and where users are riding dockless bikes. Data reporting standards are a really important piece of any city's dockless bike share regulatory framework. Cities should require operators to provide access to data on the location of every operational bike in a standardized format. This real-time verified data from operators is also critical for monitoring and enforcing compliance with other city policies. And then, of course, anonymized trip data, maintenance activity data, and crash data should also be shared periodically with the city through a standardized format that's detailed in the regulations. And in addition to data reporting, cities may also want to require operators to distribute periodic surveys to their users in order to evaluate system performance and to better understand who and why people are riding dockless bike share. So the final operations objective is to protect users. Cities, of course, have a responsibility to protect residents and visitors riding dockless bikes on their streets, and they need to establish requirements for operators to ensure user protections. Requiring operators to clearly display safety information in various places is one way to do this. So safety information like obeying local traffic laws and checking the bike for damage before riding should be available on the operators' websites and also in their apps, and that information should be triggered upon registration. And then cities might also want to kind of take a step further and require that especially pertinent information, such as the operator's contact phone number, be displayed on every bike for more easy communication to users. Cities, of course, should also clearly establish standards for the bikes themselves and should assess operators' bikes prior to giving permission to operate. Proof of a process for users to notify the company of safety or maintenance issues involving their bike should also be required, along with liability insurance. So, having these well thought out policy requirements is great, but if there's no infrastructure to ensure operators are meeting those requirements, or there's no capacity to enforce requirements that aren't being met, then these requirements sort of lose their value pretty quickly. So it's critical to first have a data sharing requirement in place that allows the city to access information in real time and also access periodic reports for things like crashes and maintenance. And then the city should have staff who are responsible for monitoring dockless bike share operations. At a minimum, cities should have one full-time staff member who's dedicated exclusively to overseeing dockless bike share. And this would preferably be a person with GIS skills, someone who understands APIs, and of course, how to field verify operator data. It would also be ideal in cities that have the ability to support it to have an additional staff member who's responsible for community outreach and education in order to encourage the uptake of bike share citywide. And then to ensure that operators are being held accountable if they are consistently not complying with regulations, a policy enforcement strategy should be implemented from the outset. Again, a successful enforcement strategy requires reliable data from operators as well as staff to interpret that data and assess penalties where appropriate. And fines or other penalties for noncompliance and any changes to those penalties should, of course, be straightforward. They should be transparent, and they should be clearly communicated to operators. So to close, I just wanted to sort of reiterate what we see as the ultimate goal of Bikeshare, which is increasing trips made by bike and decreasing trips made by private cars. Positioned this way, Bikeshare is more than just a recreational amenity or a health benefit or a tourist attraction. It's a critical piece of a city's transition to a more sustainable transportation network. So to get to this goal, cities should develop outcome-oriented policies. They should establish monitoring and enforcement structures to make sure that those policies are being implemented appropriately. And they should consider being more proactive about adopting regulations that are flexible and adaptable to changing technologies and changing business models. Dockless bike-share operators offer a mechanism to generate real climate, health, economic benefits without the capital investment that's typically needed to launch station-based bike-share systems. It's obviously why this is attractive to many cities. But in order to realize the full benefits of a dockless bike-share system, cities have to develop clear, enforceable policies to regulate operators. And in the meantime, ITDP will continue to document best practices in order to refine our guidance around dockless bike-share regulation, and continue working with cities around the world to adapt these recommendations to fit local contexts and generate bike-share systems that work in the long term. So before I turn it over to Deng, I wanted to point you to our blog series on dockless bike-share, which is available on itdp.org. I think Christina will also send a link to that in a follow-up email. And of course, feel free to get in touch with me via email. My email's up here on the screen. If you have questions or any follow-up thoughts, I think we'll do Q&A at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Deng.
Great, thank you so much for this overview, Dana. And as Dana mentioned, yes, the links for the blog series will be included. And also anyone who attended the webinar today, your emails have been captured, and we will also be sending you the communications for our policy brief when it's released in a couple of weeks. And Deng, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Hi, everyone from the world. And this is Deng from ITB China. Fans China. Thank you, Dana, for your wonderful presentation. Now, let me show you the stories about policies for dockless bike-share in China. First, let us take a look at this picture in Guangzhou. You can see that the bikes occupied 1/3 of the road. And ITDP did a long-term bike volume survey in this station, and every year you can see that after the DBS, the bike volume is triple than before. So the DBS has changed, bring a big change to people's lives. Well, the DBS stepped into the major city in China in 2016 and got a rapid expansion in 2017. So until now, there are nearly 23 million dockless bike-share and 400 million users and 70 million trips per day in China. And so this is really big change, and it brings lots of benefits like enhance the urban mobility, and it provides a convenient and comfortable options for daily travel. Some DBS operators had called that the cycling has increased from 5.5% to 11.6%. And also, you can help the public transit to solve the last mile trip and reduce the environmental pollution. Also, because of the huge amount of bikes, it also generates several negative outcomes, like oversupply of bikes, disorderly public space, difficulty to protect users' rights, and so on. And one more thing is, it is really a considerable impact on the traditional public bike system. So, balancing all these benefits and the negative outcomes, this is all the Chinese government did. You can see this DBS policy map. There are three kinds of policies. One is for guiding opinions. It provides the development directions of DBS and about the parking guidance and the regulations. So now let me go into the first period, the tentative period. In this period, Shenzhen and Chengdu first issued the DBS policy. And luckily, and so on that ITTP was invited by the World Bank to do a project about planning and implementation about bike sharing in Tianjin City. Tianjin is the largest port city in the northern China. It is adjacent to the capital Beijing. In Tianjin, we did a lot. First, we summarized the development of Dockless Bikeshare in Tianjin, even in China, and then we do a series of surveys like the parking demand survey or like the travel characteristics of DBS survey. And then we give recommendations to the police about strategies and policy. And at last, we do planning of parking space for Dockless Bikeshare in Tianjin. So we promote this report to Tianjin government, and based on this report, the government issued several opinions on encouraging and regulating the DBS. And for the second step, they urged the DBS operator to issue the joint statement on strengthening the management of DBS. And in the next step, three departments, the Transportation Department, Traffic Police, and Urban Management Department, strengthened the management of DBS in Tianjin. So you can see the picture on the right is before and after. And then also the department strengthened the cycling. There are nearly 2,500 users were blacklisted. So recently, Tianjin government also planned the parking space in the core area of Tianjin. So it still will go on. So let's go to the next period, outbreak period. In this period, the DBS got a rapid expansion. So at the same time, it caused a lot of problems. And during this period, the most important DBS policies in China emerge. It is made by the Ministry of Transport. So this policy named the guidance on encouraging and regulating the development of internet rental bikes. Why it is so important? Because it means that the national government has admitted the DBS concept. The national government's attitude is to encourage the DBS So it is really meaningful for the DBS development. In this policy, the DBS was clearly defined into the internet rental bike. It means that it is a kind of rental bike by internet. And it is a component of the urban green transport system. And it is an important way to facilitate short distance travel for the public transport interchange and transfer. And 2 months later, Shanghai is the first city to issue free standard for share bikes. The DBS survey specification and the technical specification include the bike and the e-mobile. Okay, let's go to the third period, the cooling period. After the rapid expansion, the bikes caused lots of problems, so the government began to stop launching the new bikes. Nearly 17 cities across the country has announced that. And some cities even strengthened the management of DBS, like Beijing. The general release will be renewed or scrapped in 3 years. And the survey rate should be no less than 95%. And Guangzhou, the launching plan must be reported, otherwise it will not be released. So this is a 3 periods of the policies in China. In the next step, I will show you more details about the city policies. Well, let me see Shenzhen first. Shenzhen is the window of China's reform and opening up, and it is the first special economic zone established in China. It's near Hong Kong and Guangzhou. Shenzhen did a lot of actions on the DBS management. And until November 2017, there are nearly 890,000 Dockless share bikes and 8 DBS operators, 22 million users, and 5.4 million trips per day only in one city. So Shenzhen did a series of actions. The actions include these 5 key areas. One is for the policies regulations. The second is the operator's responsibility. The third is the industry standards management. Fourth is the infrastructure construction. The fifth is the civilization guidance. Let's see the first, improved policies and regulations. Shenzhen first issued several opinions on encouraging and regulating the internet bike rental survey. It is the first city to advocate the idea of encouraging the development of DBS. It provides the development direction, and it clearly defines the responsibility of government and operators. And it also defines the requirements for the operation and the survey of operators. The second step, Shenzhen issued guidelines for setting of the bike parking area. It explicits certain conditions, setting forms, and installations requirements for the parking facility in the bike parking areas. In the future, Shenzhen will issue the management measures, operation survey specification, and bike technical standard. For the second area, supervise operators to implement their main responsibility. First, guide operators to strengthen self-regulation. You can see the picture on the right. In January 2017, the first domestic self-discipline joint statement happened, issued, and the second urged the operator to strengthen parking and maintenance of management. At the end of September 2017, the operators have removed or repaired more than 520,000 bikes for illegal parking, safety hazards, and so on. And also, the government issued to the operators strengthening the standardized management of internet rental bike. It proposed 10 requirements, and you can see on the right picture, the mobile response. Mobile. It is said that the mobile actively support the regulations. And the second, it urged the operators to strengthen the users' management and guide users to establish a safe and civilized cycling environment. And for the third, strengthen the industry standard management. Shenzhen issued the Shenzhen Internet Bike Rental Management Implementation Plan. It includes the bike lottery management. The operators are required to submit the schedule of their bikes and operators. And after the daily inspections and on-site inspections by the various departments, the phenomenon of disorderly lodging has basically been curbed. And about the bike parking management, government operator corporations standardized the parking of bikes for more than 270,000 times. In here, the Shenzhen Urban Management Department also penalized the DBS operator. You can see the list on the right. And about the fund management, the government required operators to publicize the deposit and the prime payment management on the app, and organize the City Finance Office, City Market Supervision Committee, and other departments to make the supervision measures. And also, the government urged all operators to formulate the plans for bad weather, May events, or other emergency. And the Shenzhen also explored the establishment of a long-term management. The government take a park as a pilot area and use a smart parking facility and the government supervision plan for, in order to build a closed-loop management of the whole process and the entire chain. The fourth, improve the infrastructure construction. The bicycle lane, the Shenzhen government already built like 73 kilometers of bicycle lane after the DBS. And about the bicycle parking zone, there are nearly 8,000 bike parking zones are planned around the rail or the bus stations. And also, they're trying to use the intelligent parking facilities. And also, the government also plan to build a bicycle superhighway. For the fifth, strengthen the proper guidance and civilization guidance. They promote the civilized cycling, orderly parking by the media, by the internet, and other channels. You can see the pictures on the right. They even built a website and made public benefit video to promote the concept. And they hold the public transportation week and the car-free day. And at last, they encourage the volunteers, the citizens, to participate in the non-official organizations such as the Mobile Hunter and the Blue Man to maintain the order of the share bikes. Okay, and the next one I want to show you is Hangzhou. Hangzhou has the biggest public bike system in the world, and the Hangzhou is next to Shanghai. Hangzhou built a plan for Hangzhou Internet Rental Bike Supervision Plan for. It includes daily monitoring, decision support, information inquiry, mobile monitoring, credit rating, deposit account information, six parts. And now the plan for correct 7 operators and 88 million bikes data. And the plan for now is only open to the supervisory departments. You can see on the right the picture. Different color means different kinds of DBS, and you can see the heat map below. The attractions, subway station, and key shopping areas are the key areas of supervision. When the number of bikes parked inside exceeds 5,000, it will report to the police office. Okay, at last, ITDP also cracked the world's DBS policy and built a DBS database. It included the number and the city of a DBS in the world and the policies and the primary cities situation. If you want more details, you can click the link below. So this is all my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Deng, for your presentation. And thank you to those who have submitted questions throughout. So we can go right in and dive into some that were submitted today. And perhaps, Deng, you can answer this. And if you don't want to, it can be Dana. But can you define what is the oversupply of bikes? So what is the metric used for defining this, such as ITDP's ratio of 10 to 30 bikes per 1,000 people?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, now about the oversupply. That is really a big problem in China, and no one knows exact number of bikes in the city. And because it's a new operation and it's a new things in China and in the world, and the operation problem is really like difficult. And now there is no good way to just better operation all these bikes. And so now in China, the bikes are always crowded in the hot areas in the city.
Okay, thank you. And this question is for Dana. While you were gathering research for the policy brief, which Dockless operators did you speak to?
Yeah, we spoke to several Dockless operators, both to help inform research around the policy brief and to provide information to the Bikeshare Planning Guide update. We spoke to, I would say, like the major Dockless operators that are operating both in the US and in China and elsewhere. So we did speak to a variety of operators.
Great, thank you. This question is for Deng. What have been the main challenges for Dockless Bikeshare in China, and how many cities have adopted the model?
Oh, the big challenge of DBS in China is the oversupply and the disorderly of the public space. So, and it is really hard and cause a loss of time and people to just manage the order of the DBS. And there are nearly 17 cities stop launching the new bikes.
Great, thank you. Wow, 17 cities is quite a lot. This question is for Dana. This is from Nicola. The problem with new on-demand mobility and shared mobility is the externalization of a lot of costs and risks by private operators. Are there examples where the regulatory framework internalizes some of these costs for dockless bike sharing, similar to contracts for public transit operators?
Wow, that's a great question. And it's something that we've definitely considered. It's not explicitly captured in the framework, but it's something that cities obviously need to be aware of. I think there's a couple of sort of emerging best practices around this. One that comes to mind is in Singapore, where the Land Transport Authority there has MOUs with each of the, I believe there's 5 dockless operators in Singapore. And as part of that MOU, the operators are working with the city to cite and sort of draw out bike share parking spaces. So they're just, kind of painted squares on either the sidewalk or the street, but the city and the operators are sort of sharing the cost of that endeavor. And I'm not sure if that specifically addresses your question, but I think it's a good example of sort of internalizing those costs through a regulatory approach.
Great, thanks, Dana. This question can be for Dana or Deng. Perhaps Dana can talk about international cities and Deng can point to Chinese cities. But what are some cities that you say have exemplary data reporting standards for dockless bike share?
Yeah, sure. I can give a couple outside of China. I think Seattle has a pretty good reporting standard. Seattle identified a standardized format in their permit requirements for how data should be reported. And they also allow operators to submit their data through this transparency collaborative at the University of Washington. So there's sort of this middle organization between the operator and the city. And then the city just has access to that data when they need to look at it. But it's housed at the University of Washington. And that's a really interesting model that I think some other cities are looking at. Because one of the main concerns around data sharing from the operator standpoint is, of course, that data becoming public or being used or not being able to be protected by, where it's housed in the city. So I think that University of Washington model is something that could potentially be replicated elsewhere. And then I'll also just point to Manchester in the UK. They're sort of an interesting example because their system is, they only have Mobike operating there. So it's a single operator system, but they are using Mobike's platform for data reporting, and that seems to be working quite well as far as their ability to access that data and use it to track progress towards their broader climate goals.
Great, thanks, Dana. And Deng, do you have any examples of Chinese cities? I know you already mentioned Shenzhen, but perhaps there are others?
Yes, Shenzhen and Hangzhou. Hangzhou built a data shared platform, and Hangzhou has collected nearly 7 DBS operators. So and nearly 88,000 bikes data in the platform. So yeah, that is a way just to like the collecting the or sharing using the data, the DBS data.
Great.
And for another aspect, the mobile and OFO are announced recently that uh, they will share their data to the government, but now only for the government, not for the public.
Great. Thank you for that, Deng. This question is also for you. I believe they were referring to the Tianjin paper. But could you please tell us about the increase in modal share of cycling post Dockless Bikeshare? The Dockless Bikeshare white paper data showed in the earliest slide was done by Mobike and was reflective of only their impact. Oh,
Well, because the public bike is not in the core area in the city in Tianjin, and so the DBS will go just like smoothly in the core area and develop great wealth. And in Hangzhou, the biggest public bike system it has, and now after the DBS come in, these two systems have like fight with each other, and now the DBS has just because there's lots of share bikes, so it will easily just like beat the public bikes.
great. Thank you, Deng. Dana, this question is for you. Perhaps you could give a general overview, but can you discuss how these policies may actually discourage operators from entering a city in the first place, such as some of them may not have locked to technology or cannot identify the ROI for entering a market with a cap on bikes?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a really good point. I think there's definitely the potential that if a city adopts stricter regulations at the outset, that certain operators may not be able to meet those regulations and may not be able to provide bikes to the city. But I think it's important to keep in mind that it's a lot more difficult to ask for operators to meet requirements later on down the road after they have already been operating and already sort of have bikes on the streets that people are using. So I would sort of encourage cities to think really critically about what they want their bike share system to look like and how certain policies will get them there from the outset, and sort of leave it up to operators to figure out how they can meet those requirements in a way that makes business sense to them. Because if certain operators aren't able to meet certain requirements, then maybe they're not going to be able to provide a high quality service to the city, and that's not really in the city's best interest.
Great, thank you, Dana. And this question, I'm going to point to you, Deng. Perhaps you can talk about the context. But how do you think local governments and with governments that you've worked with can ensure that bike share companies such as Mobike or OFO do not grayball or obscure the data and provide inaccurate data to be used for enforcement and regulation?
Yes. Before the government strengthened the DBS management, and there's still many questions about the DBS DBS mod is non-profit, so the DBS operators don't want to show all the data to the public, and for now, as I mentioned, the Hangzhou Plan for every bike has only a Unicode ID, so the platform can check every bike's GPS and every bike's situation. So it used like the internet or use the technology can just solve this problem.
Great, thank you. So we are running low on time, so I will just take 2 more questions. One more for Deng and one for Dana. Deng, do you think there's a minimum population or a certain city size that cities need to have dockless bike share? So for example, with smaller cities, do you think that it's a good system and profitable as well?
Yes. For example, Dockless share bike is used for two main purposes. One is for the connection from your just living place to the public transit stations in a big city, and for another thing is for the short distance trip. So in a small city, and the DBS can greatly solve these problems. So because DBS can park by everywhere you want, and so it's really convenient and comfortable to just solve the short distance problems in the small cities. So it also fit the small city. Okay, that's my answer.
Great, thank you so much. And for Dana, I'm sure there are many challenges to implementation operation, but can you pinpoint what might be the biggest challenge that dockless bike shares systems are facing for implementation?
Yeah, I think up until now, there's sort of this narrative around dockless bike share in that, you know, there are private companies coming in, and so the city doesn't necessarily need to invest any kind of time or money in making the system work. And that's true to an extent in that they don't necessarily need to contribute to capital costs. But I think as far as implementation and laying the groundwork for a long-term, sustainable dockless bike share system, the city needs to put sort of procedures or frameworks in place that allow them to oversee the system, in its entirety. So that means either designating staff or hiring staff who are responsible for overseeing dockless bike share. And also creating some sort of policy framework that regulates operations. Those are kind of the two key things. And then of course, having the data to both monitor and enforce policies, but also evaluate system performance overall and over time. I think those are kind of key pieces of implementation.
Great, thank you so much, Dana and Deng, for your answers and your presentations today. As mentioned earlier, this webinar recording and also the PowerPoint slides will be made available on our website at ittdp.org. I will also send a link to those things in my follow-up email. And lastly, if I can just point you to another webinar we are having this month. It will be on April 25th at 1 p.m. EST. The topic is freight and environmental justice with our host, Genevieve Giuliano. She is also a mobilized speaker